Okay. Okay. So glad we're all here today. All right, we'll start with chapter 29. And prior to the opening of chapter 29, remember that King Achish has given Daniel and his group of men some property, some territory there, and it is Ziklag, and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, but that's the name of the area that the king has given him for him to set camp up. So the Philistines are ready to go into battle, and David follows right along. David and his troops are in with King Achish, but they're about to take off. They're assembling, getting all their stuff together. And the other Philistine commanders, though, they're kind of leery of this because they remember what David has done. David is the guy who killed Goliath. And they remember the chanting and the victory songs where they were saying that, that the king, that Saul had killed thousands, but David had killed tens of thousands. So in that remark, they are remembering all the things that David is responsible for. And they're kind of afraid that if he goes into battle with them, he may turn on them and he might try to attack them. So we know then that behind the scenes, of course, always God's in control, and he just planned out because he didn't want David to have to go fight against his fellow countrymen. And remember, he's in the Philistine territory. Saul is still king, and he's fighting them. He's the one they're fighting. Of course, Saul's got this thing against David, trying to kill him always. So David has escaped and just gone into another country to avoid this situation. We know that it says David, and all my books got messed up. In this chapter 29, when David's trying to talk to Achish and convince him to go, we know that the king references God twice. But our footnote in the scripture tells us that this is not because he's thinking of going over to our God, of transferring over, of doing away with his gods, but because it's just a respect for David. And he does have respect for David at this point, because up until now, David has been right there and has led lots of men and killed lots of enemies, but they were also enemies of Israelites as well. So King Achish tells him, he said, go back, get up early in the morning, and you just go back into Philistine territory, and we're going to pursue on. So David agreed, and they go on to Jezreel, and that's where the Israelites continue. So in the Israelites and the Philistines continue their battle. So in chapter 30, when that chapter 30 begins, we know that David has and his men, so they load up and they travel back. And it's like a 3-day journey, but they go back to their camp. And when they get there, they have discovered that the Amalekites have raided and destroyed everything. They've burned the place down. They've taken all the women as hostage, even David's 2 wives. They've taken all their animals, their flocks, their herds, everything. So everything's gone. They cry, they weep, they mourn because they've lost their families. So David is even his men kind of turn on him. They're like, think, well, we're going to kill you because you're the one here who's responsible for this. And so David turns to God. He doesn't turn to any outside source for some kind of instruction on what's to do. He always goes to God. Now, he can't go to the tabernacle because remember, the tabernacle is in Saul's territory. So he has to send for Abiathar. Remember, Abiathar at this time is the priest. And he comes to him and he just says, bring your ephod. Remember, that's the vest that contains the pocket that's got the Urim and the Thummim in it. So when he shows up, David says to him, he says, I need to ask God what to do. And he says, God, which direction should I go? Shall I pursue these men? You want me to go after them? And his reply that he gets is yes. So David, remember, he's got 600 men. Well, 400 of them go with him and 200 stay behind. The scripture tells us they're exhausted from fighting and from doing different things. And they really need 200 of them to stay there and kind of, keep guard. I don't know. There's not a whole lot left there, but to kind of hold the fort down. So he continues, they go on their pursuit, and they come across an Egyptian who is just sitting out in a field. And the Amalekites had just left him there. He's like a slave to one of them. So they find out that this guy has not eaten or had anything to drink for 3 days. They take him to David, and David feeds him. They give him food. They give him drink water. And he says, who are you? And where did you come from? So he tells him that I'm an Amalekite, and I was with the group that went in all the territories, destroyed the territories, and burned Ziklag. And so David is kind to him by giving him food and drink, and the man returns this kindness by saying to him that he's going to lead him to the enemy. He's going to lead him to where these enemies are. So David promises not to kill him, not to harm him in any way, because he's going to end up helping him. So sure enough, the Amalekites are scattered on the hillside right where this Egyptian told them to go. So they approach them and they fight with them. And it says like all night and all the next day. And David, was able to, some of them escaped, they ran off, but he was able to recover all the people, including his 2 wives, and all the livestock, everything that had been their plunder, their captive stuff there. He was able to get it all, and he returned it all. So they're on their way back to their little village, their homeland there. And some of the men are saying, you know what, we don't need to share with those guys, those 200 that left behind, because they didn't help us fight. So we're not going to share with them. Let's just keep it all. And David comes up and he says, and would somebody like to read what David says? I'm in chapter 30, and it begins with verse 23.
I have it.
Okay.
But David said, no, my brothers, don't be selfish with what the Lord has given us. He has kept us safe and helped us defeat the band of raiders that attacked us. Who will listen when you talk like this? We share and share alike, those who go to battle and those who guard the equipment.
Okay, go on. Read the next one too.
From then on, David made this decree and regulation for Israel, and it is still followed today.
Okay, so this was like a policy that was established by David right here, because in the midst of all of his success, he still remained compassionate. He remained humble, and he told his fellow people and these warriors, don't be selfish. The Lord is the one who's given us this victory, and he has the one who's preserved all our belongings. So it says here, it says David's experience of the Lord's mercy formed the sense of justice that God had established in him as a leader over his people. He led by modeling dependence on the Lord and a heart of gratitude. And that's how David led. And we're going to see as we continue on into chapter 31 how different it was than the way Saul led. The Philistines, as we start chapter 31, they fought hard against Israel, and many died that day on Mount Gilboa. Saul's 2 sons died, and Saul himself was critically injured. We know from this that, let me read this thing up here in this particular Bible. It says, the Philistines had a well-earned reputation for torturing their captives. Remember what they did to Samson? They gouged out his eyes, remember, and kind of around, made fun of him. Okay, so Saul is just not wanting to go through that. He just didn't want to risk any kind of physical mutilation or any abuse. So he goes to his armor bearer. Remember, he's critically injured here, and he asked his armor bearer to kill him. Go ahead and stick that sword through me. And he refuses. One of the things that stuck out to me when I was reading this, and this is the footnote from 31:3-4. It's from the verses 3 and 4, and it says, Saul was tall, handsome, strong, rich, and powerful. But all of this was not enough to make him someone we should emulate. He was tall physically, but he was small in God's eyes. He was handsome, but his sin made him ugly. He was strong, but his lack of faith made him weak. He was rich, but he was spiritually bankrupt. He could give orders to many, but he couldn't command their respect or allegiance. Saul looked good on the outside, but he was decaying on the inside. A right relationship with God and a strong character are much more valuable than a good-looking exterior.
That's good.
I loved that. I loved that paragraph. That's why I wanted to read that too. And the armor bearer had a dilemma. He had a moral dilemma to make, because when a king gave an order, he was supposed to obey it. It didn't make any difference, what. But there's a difference, it says, between following an order with which you don't agree and following one is wrong. And so he didn't do it. He refused. It says it's never right or ethical to carry out a wrong act, no matter who gives the order or what the consequences for disobeying may be. Saul looked at death the same way he went through life, and that was by his own accord. He took matters into his own hands without thinking of God or asking for his guidance. And the footnote here goes on to say that if our lives aren't the way we should like them to be now, we can't assume that change will come more easily later. During death, we will respond to God the same way we've been responding all along. Coming face to face with death only shows us what we're really like. Pretty powerful, huh? That asks us to consider the difference between this last judge of Israel and the first king. Saul, the king, was characterized by inconsistency, disobedience, and self-will. He did not have a heart for God. Samuel, the judge, was characterized by consistency, obedience, and deep desire for God's will. He had a genuine desire for God. Remember when God called Samuel? Samuel spoke up and he said, "Speak, Lord, for your servant's listening." But when the Lord, through Samuel, called Saul, remember, that's how that progressed. Saul replied, "Why do you say such a thing to me?" So Saul was dedicated to himself, and Samuel was dedicated to God.
Wow. Charlotte, what was the, when you gave those words and you gave the opposite, like you started with tall, handsome, strong, rich, and then ruler. I got, even though he was handsome, he was ugly on the inside. Even though he was strong, he was weak. He was rich, but he was spiritually bankrupt. What was the opposite of tall? The first one you said.
Short and something.
He was tall physically, but he was small in God's eyes.
Okay.
Okay. Then he
Yeah, I
was-
like that.
Sin made him ugly.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good stuff. And I really love, the juxtaposition or the contrast between Saul and Samuel that you just gave.
Right. I know. I loved that, reading that as well. Because, Samuel didn't hesitate. He's like, Lord, your servant's speaking. Your servant's listening. Speak to me. Whatever you say, I do. And then Samuel goes to Saul and said, this is what the Lord says. And Saul, who are you talking to? Why are you saying that to me? So immediately running away from the responsibility that he was given, where Samuel just was willing and stepped up to the plate.
Right.
There's one more thing I want to read to you, and it's the last paragraph here in chapter 31 under the footnotes. Y'all know how I like footnotes. It says, heroic spiritual lives are built by stacking days of obedience one on top of the other. Like a brick, each obedient act is small in itself, but in time, the acts will pile up. And a wall of strong character will be built. A great defense against temptation. We should strive for consistent obedience each day. It's like, I used to teach my kids when I was teaching school in math, especially I thought math, like more so than any of the other subjects, is like building a house, and you got to lay the foundation well. And if you don't, you don't learn how to add and subtract and then multiply and divide, and you can't learn percent, and you can't learn anything else that goes on top of it, because everything's based on the bottom things. I've tried to stress to my granddaughter, I was teaching her last fall, everything, you got to know the multiplication tables. If you don't memorize those, it's downhill, sister. So, that's just the way it is. So this is what they're saying here. It's like a brick or building a house, one step on top of the other. And each day that you are obedient to God, that you follow his will, makes it a little bit easier, makes your faith a little bit stronger, and it builds a strong, strong character. And when you have a strong character, you're able to resist temptation, and you're able to live in obedience to God. What are you laughing at, Susan? I see you're on my page now.
Well, Deborah sneezed, and that brought her up to the screen,
Was that me?
Replace you.
No, not me.
Who
Me,
sneezed?
I
Oh,
started.
Debbie
Okay.
Tubbs.
Oh,
That made me
I
laugh.
could have got a, hey, bless you, but no.
I did say bless you, but it did, my screen didn't turn green.
Now, who sneezed? That was not me who sneezed.
Debbie.
Deborah Tubbs.
I think you've lost control, Charlotte.
Oh, we have two Deborahs. Oh my gosh.
okay. Debbie Tubbs sneezed, apparently. I didn't even hear it. Bless you.
Charlotte, I've got to say something else. Is it time to interject stuff?
Sure, it is. Go for it.
Okay. You said something about, and I didn't get it all down. I try to take notes on everything. We will respond based on something, I guess, how we've always responded. But then you said when we're face to face with death, it will show us what we're really like.
Correct.
And yesterday I was showing Dr. Hill, y'all know them in our church, probably. He's a cardiologist. He and Gwen, a house. And I don't know how we got off on the subject but he said, I said, please tell me that when people get old and get closer to death, that they become more kind and gentle. And he said, well, not really. I was like, what? And he said, not necessarily. Usually they become more of what they were. And I was like, oh gosh,
That,
you
yeah,
know, because you think people will get more kind and more gentle when we get closer to thinking we're going to die, maybe. But anyway, so there's two people who said that 2 days in a row.
there you go. Because
Mhm.
it's like, you know, we are what we've always been unless we
Mhm.
do something to change that. And unless we make a conscious effort to change now, it's, you know, it's not gonna be easier to change later.
Right. Makes
So,
sense.
And you know, speaking of you taking notes, I know last Wednesday night I was writing just as fast as I could, and Will was going fast. And he's doing stuff and doing stuff. And we had a break. I just went to the back and I said, Tarver, you got to hold those things over there longer. I can't take notes. He said, I'm going to email it all to you. So that because it was, I just couldn't get it all down. And I did not send that because nobody said, hey, I want that. But some of you already have it because you were there. But if there's any way, I know Angie, you said you've got company, and Elizabeth, you said you might, but Debbie was there, and Susan was there, and Judy, and Kathy Steele and Kathy Steele's sister. We had a strong row of women that were right in his face. And were, you know, I mean, it was so, I was just felt so encouraged that we were all there as a group. And I would love it, you know, anybody else. Deb, if you can join us, I know Elizabeth, you and Angie have already said you've got some plans going on. You can join us Wednesday night, it'd be awesome. We've been trying to meet in the foyer like 10 minutes before it starts, and it starts at 6:30. It's really good. It's really, really good. I thought the message yesterday was good. Last Wednesday, it was like, whew, because and Debbie, you and Susan chiming in. It was a lot of the how it was written, why it was written, the history, you know, a bunch more background than the meat of the matter to me. And then Sunday he got into, you know, more of the meat of the matter, or that's what I would call it. If y'all got any comments on that, Debbie.
Well, he stressed two things. One was the fact that the imagery was familiar to Jews, and a lot of it was from the Old Testament. So he said that was who Revelation was being written to, the Jewish Christians. And the other thing he said was it's cyclorama, and I didn't know what that word meant, but he used an example of standing on Cinderella's castle in Disney World and looking around you and starting at one place and then trying to describe what you see. So he said it's not chronological. So that was news to me.
Great,
Okay.
and that's a great point. Because it's like when somebody describes something, you know, you describe it like how you remember it. And you might start in Disney World and go that way around, and somebody else might start and go that way around. And you're covering everything, but it might just be in a little different order. It's the way that you remember it, the way you see it.
Right.
So it's a new word to me, and I knew, yeah, that was great. That was, and great point, Susan. Thanks for bringing that up.
You're welcome. I took notes too.
Good girl. I know I have a special little notebook just for Revelation. And I dug out my notebook where I started it, and it was like, okay, well, maybe I didn't actually talk about what I was supposed to talk about because
Oh,
you
no,
know,
I disagree. I mean, just think, after going through our year and a half of study and then going through 9 weeks with Will, how much more information that you'll have. Because you did a great job with that, Charlotte.
Mhm. Yes.
thanks a lot. Well, we all studied hard on that, and I used the books that I bought, the reference books he told me to, and
Mhm.
he didn't use those. I'm sure he does. I'm sure he's going to. But what I'm saying is the information that he shared with us was not, a lot of it was not what we had already talked about. So you're right. In all of our studies that we've had, and then going through this with him, hopefully we'll be a lot more informed and gain a lot more knowledge. So it's good. It's a good thing.
Okay, girls, I gotta go. I'll
Well,
see
we-
y'all next
Deborah.
week.
Hi, Deborah.
See you. Bye. Don't forget to come to Pyros.
Okay, I got it on my calendar, but
Okay.
Susan, remind me if you will.
Okay.
Susan takes care of me. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
She's gone. Susan, are you reminding her?
I did today, and I have one or two other occasions.
Thank you. I did yesterday. So you remind her next week and remind her that it's at 11 or she'll show up at 12.
Okay, okay, I will.
And the reason we do that at 11 is so we can get in before the crowd starts, because that's
Yes,
what,
open at 11.
Right.
Yes.
Mhm.
well, Angie, you'll be able to be there, won't you?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Good, good, good. And I told Gail, and she said she's hoping to be able to join us then. So maybe that'll work out. Did I tell y'all already that Gail's gonna be a grandmother again?
Oh, her daughter that was in our small group?
Yeah, she sent me a message about that. I was thinking I had mentioned that, but maybe I was waiting to let her tell you. But anyway, and she said Warren is here today with her. So I don't know. Laura's